This is Stephen Foster at the John Hansard Gallery on the occasion of Ruth Maclennan's exhibition An Arcadia. This is a new film that's been commissioned by John Hansard Gallery with the film and video umbrella. You've been working for some time filming in Kazakhstan. Would you like to tell us how you began to start working there?
I took a train through Kazakhstan in 1990 from Bukhara in Uzbekistan to Moscow when I was a student. And I was completely sort of overwhelmed by this kind of wide expanse that went on and on and on for 2 days with the odd camel. But I didn't know I'd go back and work there. But I was invited by An Arcadia, the curator, to visit at the invitation of the British Council in 2006. And then she organised it with Yulia Sorokina, a curator from Almaty, Kazakhstan, an exhibition with residencies with artists staying in Kazakhstan and Central Asian artists coming to Britain, to Manchester and London. And so that's when I went back there to work.
And you began making some film work at that time, so clearly it was about various political situations and the whole notion of the desert landscape and its relationship to cities, amongst other things. How did you begin filming?
I kind of struggled with the idea of like, well, what can I do? You know, I'm not very interested in going out and I can't go and make work about other people's problems in a sense. It feels like it's not, you know, that's not my business. It's, you know, but so I read lots of travelogues, some 18th and 19th century travelogues, because Central Asia occupies this really important place, I think, in the English and Scottish imagination. Well, it's the site of the Great Game. It's a kind of site of lots of political kind of turmoil still, not so much in Kazakhstan, but it wasn't Kazakhstan in the 19th century. It was shifting borders, a sort of field of conflict and struggle between Russia and Britain. So I was reading all these things, and then I came across an article about eagle hunting with eagles in Kazakhstan. So I went out there with a very complicated idea about how I would do something with this eagle, but in the end the film ended up being really the story of that encounter between me and the Kazakh eagle hunters and the Russian, or Russian-speaking anyway, artists who helped me. And it was very much about this kind of meeting between these different people and in this incredible landscape, because it's shot in this canyon. Actually, the postcards in this exhibition are of that canyon, the Valley of Castles, which immediately made me think of Southwest America, even though I've never been to Southwest America. Everybody recognises it because it's the Western landscape, it's part of us, it's kind of imagined.
This recognition of Kazakhstan appearing like other places and its relationship to both filmically and visually is something that runs through your work. You then went and made a film, Capital, which is included in this exhibition here. When did you make that? That
I made actually the following autumn, and we took the night train from Almaty to Astana, which is the new capital. It was the president, Nazarbayev, decided to build a new capital, right, I guess to distinguish it from the old Soviet capital, right, Almaty. So in 1997 it was founded as Astana, which means capital in Kazakh, so I call my film Capital. It's a free economic zone, which means that it's the place to go and all the international companies are there and so on. And
it feels very much like a modern city plonked in a desert.
Yes, absolutely. That's exactly what it is, in the middle of the steppe. And there's wind constantly blowing through, and when you're on the train, you go through the steppe and then you get there. That's it. There's nothing in between. When I went out there, I really had this sense that I wanted that my coming to it was as much the subject as the place itself, that kind of encounter. And so the character in the film is a sort of traveller, a kind of a traveller who's been around a bit, and she is addressing the prince, the ruler of the city. And there's a long tradition of that. There's, you know, Marco Polo, you know, and you know, coming back and talking to the Venetian princes and so on. But also there's women telling stories to keep alive. There's also, 1001 Nights and Scheherazade, and so there's also that kind of a character in there, sort of, and the story, the kind of tale of it, is built up from kind of snatches of anecdote that I've heard through people I met, or things that I might have heard or didn't quite hear, and some history. And in fact, I wrote while I was there. I wrote a sort of diary, I kept notes and so on, and I was filming while I was there. But the two elements kind of came together in the edit, working out exactly what it was that was there, because I was struggling with it. I mean, I had a very visceral response to Astana. I found it quite hard going. I mean, it's a very strange city, and I mean, I suppose everybody comes to it in a different way. I was there invited by the British Council, and I was staying in a flat with my family, in fact, in the flat in the top of this unfinished tower block. It seemed like every building was unfinished. Mm-hmm. It's been a very much kind of place of experiment, because in 1960s it was Celina Grad, which is Celina, the virgin lands which Khrushchev planted, or he wanted to plant the steppe, plant corn and wheat in the steppe, and that was north of around Astana, thousands of hectares. So it was that sort of. So it had been Akhmolinsk, and then it became Celina Grad, and then it became Akhmola again. So Akhmola is still sort of there underneath Astana, but it's disappearing really quickly. And this whole idea of introducing and putting over a planned city in the steppe, and this idea of the kind of clean slate seems to have been bought by everybody. You read architectural critics writing about Astana as if there wasn't anything there before.
Moving on to the film, which is the focus of this exhibition, An Arcadia. It's a very different kind of thing altogether, isn't it? I mean, it is a beautiful evocation of desert landscape, and it is has a movie feel, in the sense that there are characters and characterizations, and you wrote a script. So you came with a very clear idea. I think what's emerged is very different from your original clear idea, but you came with a very clear idea of what you wanted to do. And what was that? It's
a kind of place of discovery, and a sort of place of inner discovery or outer discovery, and that the landscape itself doesn't give anything away, and it's sort of what you bring to it. And at the same time, when I went out to show Capital and Valley of Castle in an exhibition, a previous time I'd heard about this place that was meant to be a capital city that Khrushchev was going to build, and it turned out that story was false. It had nothing to do with Khrushchev at all. I'd heard all these conflicting stories about this place where a station had been built, but in the middle of the desert, and there was no city. And then I finally managed to find, I found some way of getting there. Somebody sort of knew vaguely where it was, and strangely, it's in this village. This village called Kazakhstan. So, it's sort of confusing kind of situation when you're looking for this tiny, tiny village, which turns out it's like 3 houses, 2 of them are inhabited. And when I went there the first time, only 1 of them was inhabited.
But it has a giant railway station.
And it had this giant railway station that was completed. But 2 weeks before I found it, it had been dismantled and the bricks had been taken away. So I got there, and of course I was sort of disappointed. So I was like, oh, but you could really see that it had just been taken apart. And then suddenly that whole sort of quest that I'd gone on, not only a quest for the place that was a sort of needle in a haystack, 2 houses in the middle of the desert somewhere, but also the quest for this sort of history, the actual story. What is this place? Does it actually exist? Did it exist? And who built it? And people are telling me these completely conflicting stories, separated by 60 years, and who knows who built it? And was it ever built at all? And then I get there and it's gone.
The film has very much partly a kind of historic cowboy movie feel about it, and also feels like some of those Australian movies that are set in the outback, which are very slow paced and so on. Was that intentional?
When I arrived at this village, so it's not really, it's called the village of Kazakhstan, but it's not a village, it immediately felt to me like a film set. It was extraordinary. It had these long kind of poles in the desert where the railway track should have been. So sort of marking out the landscape. The landscape is kind of marked out by these points, like the little tiny house, these poles, sort of creaky, rusty bits of metal and signs without anything on them and tracks going nowhere. And it seemed to me that it was it was asking for a film in a sense. And so the film comes out of the landscape in a way. I mean, the idea for the film very much came out of the landscape and out of these stories that I kept hearing. And the characters came out of that too. And somehow the character of the idea, in fact, they sort of started as kind of ideas, but the archaeologist and the prospector are both characters who are, or professions, or ways of seeing the world, which are about looking underneath the ground to see what's there. In a way, in a film narrative, things happen over time. There are events which create a narrative, an arc, and a story. Whereas in this film, in a sense, it's almost like a moment taken out of time and then stretched. It's much more vertical, in fact, I think, and associative than a film would be.
Yes, I can see that.
I mean, obviously there are films.
Based around
there are films and films, but
based around your screenplay, which
yes.
again is a very beautiful prose in the sense in which it explores the nature of language in relation to nature of place, and that's a very important part of this
Yes, it's written as two monologues, in fact. It's sort of like I wrote the characters into being, they came into existence, and then they were these two characters. And I had them quite sort of round in my head as I knew who they were, in a way. And then and also when I had cast them, then I knew even more, and I could write more around those figures. And then we brought them into the landscape. And it's partly improvisational. In a sense, their two scripts came together through that actual encounter with the place. And although they're coming from very different perspectives, I mean, they're both on some kind of quest. And in fact, they're both kind of not able to be in the place in a way. I mean, I had this long stance, and I don't know, there's this kind of desire to sort of immerse yourself in it and to be part of it and to somehow authentically be part of this landscape. But you can't be.
Now in this space, you've created an installation of related material. I wonder if you'd just say a little bit about some of the things that you've brought together in this room.
The black and white framed photographs are railway workers from the National Central Archive in Almaty. What I found quite interesting about them is how many of them have a very kind of posed look. Mm-hmm. They're showing, perhaps, I mean, I'm projecting into this, but you know, the heroic worker.
It's quite clear, it's quite evident. Quite and it becomes clear because you also have an archival film in the space, which is clearly more documentary and more true, I guess.
It's a fragment of a film from 1930, so it's earlier than the photographs. And it depicts the Turk-Sib railway line, which is the railway line joining Siberia to Turkmenistan. And it met in the middle in 1930. And how it's going to enable factories to open up all the way along the line. There are two things that really struck me in that film. One is the people building the line and how they're very different from the people in those photographs. I may be making assumptions here, but it seems pretty clear to me that they are under duress. And the other thing that's really, well, one of the other things is how simple the idea is. I mean, laying a railway track is such a simple thing, and there's something very beautiful about that. Also, there are 3 posters made in 1989, and they celebrate 70 years of the Subotnik, which was voluntary labour in the Soviet Union, which was usually carried out on a Saturday, hence it's called Subotnik, as Subota means Saturday. And the significance of 1989 hadn't happened yet, because it was pre the fall of the Berlin Wall. So it kind of encapsulates that time, that sort of moment, the 1919 to 1989 is the experiment, and that's the end of it. So in a way, it's a kind of historical document but it also visually, it kind of connects to the railway workers and the photographs, and to a hanging which I bought in Kazakhstan it's from Uzbekistan, and they're known as suzane. It's a traditional yurt hanging, but interestingly it has the date on it as well, 9th of December 1970, which sort of makes you wonder what it was really for, a bedspread or... and then there are 2 photographs that I took, separated by 4 years, but one of them in particular is sort of makes me think of sort of the back lot of a film set. The one that doesn't belong to anybody.
So altogether, these materials make a very evocative portrait of a very interesting place that you've done a very interesting analysis of as an outsider, but also created a beautiful piece of work in a very evocative film. Thank you very much for that.
Thank you.